I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. Congrats, we made it to Friday. Tonight we're going to be talking about power, both political power and the other kind that turns on the lights. Two leading politicians in Washington state came out with a long-awaited report yesterday. It focused on whether it would make sense to tear down 4 dams on the lower Snake River, which many environmentalists want to do, or to keep the dams and their dependable green power generation, which lots of utilities want. That's tonight's big story. The bottom line, Senator Patty Murray and Governor Jay Inslee agreed that it is not feasible to tear down the dams, at least not right now, but it could be in the future. Let's set the scene here. The 4 dams we're talking about are in the southeastern part of Washington state along the Snake River there, and not far from where it flows into the Columbia. The Army Corps of Engineers built the dams back in the 1960s and 70s. In recent years, there's been a growing push to get rid of the dams to help salmon runs, which are in danger of going extinct, and the orca whales, or the killer whales, which live in Puget Sound and feed on the salmon. Just 6 weeks ago, we showed you some of the ads that started running around the Northwest in an effort to push back against a movement. It was funded by the utilities that get the electricity from those dams, and they want to keep them running. The future of the dams evolved into a bitter fight over the last few years with huge lawsuits and angry accusations from both sides. That is why Murray and Governor Inslee got involved to try and sort out exactly what's happening and what's possible. They took input from thousands of people, including communities, tribes, and, as they like to say, other stakeholders. Don't you just love that term? Some of their findings include these statements about breaching, which, by the way, is a fancy word for tearing something down. Here's the first one. The joint federal-state process makes clear that with adequate investment and coordination, it is possible to replace most of the services and benefits provided by the dams in the event of a breach and to mitigate the loss of others. But we are adamant that in any circumstance where the lower Snake River dams would be breached and the replacement and mitigation of their benefits must be pursued before decommissioning and breaching. Also, breach is not a feasible option in the near term, and replacing the energy production of the lower Snake River dams is achievable given our existing commitments, the amount of regional clean energy generation already in development, and the federal resources available. But moving from the realm of the possible into reality requires getting these resources built in an effective, efficient manner. Now, I know that's not the most riveting TV that you've ever seen, but I thought it was important to share the key points of the report with you. Now, we can talk about what comes next. Murray and Inslee have pledged to take steps to move the process forward, things like improving fish passages for the salmon and creating better habitat in the rivers for them. Also, Inslee has pledged to try to get legislation passed that will make it faster and easier to build clean energy resources and to put up power lines to send that energy around. But they offered no timeline and no guarantees. As you might imagine, this conclusion was closely watched by both sides. Today I talked with 2 environmental groups and an organization representing the power companies. Let's start with the power folks.
It was really a great day for the region.
Not exactly a shocking conclusion. Kurt Miller is executive director of Northwest River Partners. That's a trade group representing more than 100 community-owned power companies in Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana, Utah, Nevada, and Wyoming. His group wants to keep the dams, and they're pleased that the political leaders found it was not feasible to tear them down in the near future.
And that's the message that we've been trying to share all along, is that, listen, we understand what people are trying to do, and salmon are super important. But there are other things that are also super important in terms of trying to achieve our clean energy goals and keep electricity costs affordable and provide irrigation to farmers and all those things. And essentially they agreed with that.
Now, the electric industry sometimes argues that the power from those dams are critically important, and the political leaders agreed with them, at least for now. But it might surprise you to learn how little energy they actually produce. Do you know, I'm sure you do, what is the percentage of energy that the dams supply to the region? Because I think it's pretty small, isn't it?
Yeah, so you hear all sorts of different things. And so I think it's a great question. And I think the real question, though, should be...
Don't pivot, mister. What's the answer to that?
I can answer both. I can answer the question that you asked and also the question
Excellent.
I want to answer.
Okay, let's start with the one I asked.
So the one you asked, yes, sir. So the one you asked was what percentage of generation do the dams provide to the region? And that percentage for public power customers, I think, is about, so customers who get their electricity from a community-owned utility, and most of those get their power from the Bonneville Power Administration. I think the dams represent about 11% of that generation. Okay. They also, on an entire regional basis, when you include investor-owned utilities and others, and I think that number is in the neighborhood of 4 to 5%.
So really not that much in the bigger scheme of things for the whole region. But the point that he wanted to make is that in the coming years, as more coal plants shut down, those dams will have a larger percentage of dependable power for the region and will become very important. That's because wind turbines only make electricity, of course, when the wind blows, and solar only makes power when the sun shines. And the industrial batteries are not yet good enough to store significant amounts of that energy. That's all accurate, by the way. All right, now to the environmental side. You'd think that the report's conclusions would be maybe a stinging defeat, but they are definitely spinning it as a victory.
I was really excited when I read the recommendations that Senator Murray and Governor Inslee put out around the Lower Snake River Dam.
That's Pam Clough. She's an advocate with the group Environment Washington, which is fighting to protect salmon and the orcas who live in Puget Sound. The group supports tearing down those Snake River dams.
I'm really comforted that Senator Murray and Governor Inslee have publicly recognized that extinction of salmon and orcas are unacceptable and that they are committed to finding a viable way to breach the Lower Snake River dams.
Although I think you're putting a pretty good spin on it, because they said there's no way to do it now, maybe someday in the future.
They did say we're not in a place where we can do that now. We do need to replace the services that these dams provide, and that it is possible to do that. We can, there are many scenarios on the table where we can replace the energy services that these dams provide.
But none of those scenarios she mentioned will solve the problem in the short term. And it's not clear how fast the political leaders will move to make more clean energy possible.
So this is a form of progress. 5 years ago, no politician in the Pacific Northwest would say Snake River Dam removal out loud.
There's a bit more spin from Miles Johnson. He's a senior attorney with the conservation group Columbia Riverkeeper, which also supports removing the dams. The group is part of a federal lawsuit trying to get them torn down. All the sides involved in the lawsuit have taken a pause now to see how things shake out. But Johnson said ending that pause is a possibility if there's no action towards a solution. I asked if his group is disappointed by the Murray-Inslee report.
I think what we're disappointed in is the lack of a plan for replacing the dam's electricity, the lack of a timeline for doing that, and the lack of any kind of clearly defined goal for what replacement looks like. Columbia Riverkeeper and more broadly, I think most of the proponents for dam removal, we've never said just bulldoze the dams out and forget about the consequences. It's always been about a comprehensive solution that, invests in renewable energy in the Pacific Northwest and replaces, the power and the benefits of those dams. But we need to make a plan to do that.
So what's the future hold for the dams? Well, for now, they're going to keep running like they always have. And we'll watch to see if Governor Inslee does indeed introduce legislation making it easier to build those renewable energy plants. And there's no doubt environmental groups are going to be watching that closely as well. So what's your take on this? Do you want the dams to come down no matter what? Do you like the measured approach of replacing the energy before tearing the dams down? Maybe something else? Let us know, will you? Our email is thestory@kgw.com. Our voicemail is 503-226-5090. Now to another topic that gets a lot of you fired up, graffiti in Portland, specifically tagging with words or initials like you're seeing here. Earlier this week, police charged a professional skateboarder from Portland with 25 counts of criminal mischief. Emile Laurent is accused of writing the word Tendo on multiple buildings and structures over the last 4 years, causing nearly $20,000 in damages. Police think it was short for Nintendo. He's pled not guilty. His arrest had a lot of you talking about just how bad the problem is in our city. One email really stood out, and it came from a business owner named Stefan Bedger. He's the owner of Aladdin Finishers. He told me graffiti vandals have repeatedly tagged his building at Northeast 22nd and Alberta.
Oh boy, it's been going on for years and years and years. Even pre-COVID, we were getting nailed pretty good, to the point that we had, back when the city had one officer as the graffiti abatement officer, he advised at one point to have murals put on. So we had gotten in with a program with the city and had 2 murals done. The first on one half of the building, which kind of helped for about 2 years until it finally got tagged pretty excessively. They came back, did minor fixes and repairs, but it was always hard to get a hold of the guys. The other side was done about a year or 2 after that, and it's since been just destroyed.
I like talking with folks like Stefan because he's on the front lines living through this particular problem. He told me graffiti has impacted too many buildings like his, and he's frustrated that police and prosecutors are not going after more vandals like they used to.
I'd like them to go ahead and get officers hired, get those abatement officers back, start getting some sort of criminal activity, getting prosecuting going for these guys. I mean, we used to do that when they used to etch the glass. You know, we had abatement officers in here, and we would go to the courthouse and we would sit in on, stuff, whether or not I was going to see anything out of it, which I typically didn't. It was for larger crimes, for power plants and things like that for PGE. But I'd like to see a little bit more of that happen again.
Stefan also said when he calls the city to complain about his building getting tagged again, no one ever calls him back. Well, I wanted to ask the city folks about that today and asked for an interview early this afternoon, because I was told they would need the specific questions in writing in advance and much more advance notice before they could do an interview. Once we're able to get the answers, we'll be sure to bring them to you. Coming up in this November's election, we're going to get a chance to vote on whether you want to change Portland's form of government if you live in the city of Portland. The changes would add more city councilors and they would be elected from new geographic districts all over the city. Also, the mayor would move off city council into an executive role. The mayor also would not have a vote in council anymore or veto power, but they would be able to break a tie. And that's where Portland City Commissioner Dan Ryan says he does not support the reform. He talked about it this week with Laurel Porter on Straight Talk.
I, as a voter, am going to choose to vote no on this.
And why?
I'm voting no because I think that we don't need a weaker mayor. I think that the executive mayor position should be on city council. I think having the mayor in dialogue with the rest of the city council is very healthy. I think local government is hands-on and it's relational, and I think it's important for us to not be separate from one another. So I like having the mayor as a part of the city council. I'm really big advocate, and I think almost everyone is, for a city manager. And I'll tell you, having 23 bureaus and some offices that seem like bureaus, having a chance to do some systemic change on the organizational chart is very necessary, and having a city manager focused on such things like that is very important. So, and I think the geographic reach is a good idea. But all said, I think that it's not, I think we're going from the most antiquated form of government to kind of an experiment. And I don't think at a time like this, most Portlanders that I've talked to, all right, let me just say this. When I was on the campaign trail, the enthusiasm for charter review was really high. And I told this to all of the commissioners when they first came out with their proposal. And then when their proposal came out, the enthusiasm dipped considerably. And the one thing I kept hearing over and over and over again was going from 5 to 13 politicians is not my idea of reform. And so I think that that's part of it. I think we need geographic representation. I think maybe a number like 6 or 7 would be good. And I'm not sure if I could ever get strongly supportive of having multiple people from one district.
Of course, it's not up to Dan Ryan alone or anyone on City Council. The commissioners can only vote on the reforms as private citizens. Their vote counts as much as yours and mine. But Ryan isn't the only city commissioner who doesn't want the change. Both Mayor Ted Wheeler and Commissioner Mingus Mapps have raised doubts as well. You can watch the rest of Laurel's interview with Ryan tonight on Straight Talk. That's right here at 7 o'clock. Or you can watch it anytime on KGW's YouTube channel. A bold new ban in California making its way to Washington and Oregon. No more new gas-powered vehicles will be sold starting in 2035.
There's a lot of things that go through my mind on like how this is going to be possible.
The goal is to reduce emissions, but will the infrastructure for electric vehicles be ready so soon? We're getting reaction when the story returns. Oregon's favorite 200-mile relay race is back. It's Hood to Coast weekend again. Okay, technically it's 198 miles, but you know what? If you manage to make it through this thing, you can round up. You've definitely earned it. What could be more fun than getting up in the middle of the night, running down Mount Hood, through Portland, the Coast Range, and all the way to Seaside? You get to spend 2 days living in a van, camping on the side of the road, probably not getting a lot of sleep, running miles and miles through sometimes the warmest part of the summer. Maybe doing all that with your coworkers. Shout out, by the way, to the KGW Hood to Coast team. Pretty sure that was them. Well, go get them, guys. They've been cheering each other on and putting up with each other's sweats and smells since early this morning. And if all goes well, it'll continue until tomorrow afternoon when they make it to Seaside for the big celebration. Watch out for runners, by the way, on the side of the road if you're out driving this weekend. Here's a look at the map of the route. Right now, the teams are making their way through Portland. So good luck to everyone out there running. Big news for drivers this week, especially on West Coast California, especially here on the West Coast, is what I'm trying to say. California, have you heard of this, is going to ban the sale of new gas-powered cars by the year 2035. That's just 13 years from now. Oregon, Washington, and Massachusetts all plan to join in. The goal, to push consumers toward electric cars to reduce emissions and to lessen the impact on the environment. In Oregon, vehicle emission contributes to almost 40% of overall greenhouse gas emissions. But there are some things to understand about this fledgling policy because we've already been receiving your heated comments and opinions. The ban does not mean you have to stop driving your gas-powered car. It doesn't mean you have to sell it. It only stops the sale of new gas-powered vehicles in 2035. Okay, got that? Those used car shops all around town, they're going to stay open. They'll stay in business. It'll still be legal to drive gas-powered vehicles. But you will not be able to buy new ones, okay? Details on how exactly Oregon and Washington are going to implement the plan still being worked out. But as Alma McCarty tells us, reaction to the ban, even from those who drive electrical vehicles now, is not as charged up as you might think.
The sun is setting for new gasoline-powered vehicles on the West Coast.
Madam Chair, the motion passes.
The change, first approved and celebrated by California's Air Resources Board on Thursday. The state will require all new cars, trucks, and SUVs to be 100% zero emission by 2035.
States can either set their own limits that match the federal rules, or they can match California's rules.
Washington and Oregon plan to follow that path, taking up aggressive emissions targets over the next decade to clean the air and slash climate pollution. State leaders say we've already hit a milestone of 50,000 electric vehicles. With these new rules, you'll likely see even more on Oregon roads and at charging stations.
Basically, right when they released the Mach-E, that was it's just a really fun car, so it was like I had an opportunity to order one, so I jumped on it.
Husband likes cars first and foremost, so that way, so he wanted to try the electric car.
Because I travel so far back and forth from work, I live in St. Helens, we purchased a vehicle to save money on gas.
But even these early adopters have their doubts.
Definitely gonna have to expand that infrastructure to make stations available.
Still, the mile anxiety, you get that when you drive sometimes.
There's a lot of things that go through my mind on like how this is going to be possible.
Rachel Sakata is Senior Air Quality Planner at the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality.
I think people hear 100% and they go, oh my gosh, it just seems so scary. But California looked at the information, they realized, it can be done.
Within the next couple of months, Oregon DEQ will welcome public comment before proposing regulations that will scale up emission requirements, leading to a ban on new gas car sales by 2035.
And not, have all these electric vehicles without having the necessary infrastructure to charge them.
And gas cars won't be obsolete. The sale of used ones will still be allowed.
Making this transition to battery electric vehicles that have zero emissions, then it's really reducing our overall greenhouse gas emissions and other air quality pollutants overall.
That's going to be interesting. Here's a few takeaways as the story continues to develop. Washington and Oregon have not solidified any rules about this yet. Washington's Governor Jay Inslee said his state would follow California's lead, but specific regulations are still being worked out over the coming months. And the public will have a chance to weigh in. The Seattle Times reports some officials in Washington actually want that ban moved up to 2030 instead of 2035. Time will tell if that happens. And here in Oregon, no rules of the road, so to speak, just yet. The state's taking public comment about possible 2035 ban, and you can weigh in at a meeting next week. We have the details up now on kgw.com. We have already heard from some of you, though, about this as the headlines started rolling out this week. Liz asked a great question, which was touched on in the story you just saw. How will this work out for people who don't have access to a garage at home to charge their vehicle? I'm thinking about all the newer apartments and townhomes that have limited dedicated parking as is. Also, will rents increase as landlords add the charging stations? It's a great question. We can only speculate about the possible rent increases, but the Seattle Times notes the Washington legislature budgeted $69 million to set up community charging stations for people who do not live in single-family homes. So you folks in Southwest Washington probably feeling pretty good about that. Obviously, infrastructure will be one of the big questions and challenges with a long way to go in a relatively short amount of time. We'll keep an eye on what Oregon and Washington are going to do moving forward. And we also want to hear what you think about this. Send an email to thestory@kgw.com or leave us a voicemail, 503-226-5090. Don't go anywhere. The story continues right after this. This week we brought you a story that showed hate crimes against transgender communities have spiked over the past few years. Our team here at KGW created a true crime podcast series that explores the broader topic of violence against transgender people. You can listen to Should Be Alive wherever you get your podcasts. It's hosted by our own Ashley Korslund. The series examines the 2019 murder of a Vancouver teenager named Nikki Kuhnhausen, who was killed for being transgender. The podcast dives into the alarming trend of violence and murders of trans people and looks at some of the societal barriers transgender people face, like trying to change their name or assigned sex on their driver's license, for example.
They cannot find a job because they're othered or they don't pass. You know, as a trans person, you either have to be completely confident in what you look like, and that's a hard place to achieve when you're compared to the binary versions of yourself. And for trans women who don't pass, that in and of itself can provoke violence from others because they don't understand the experience.
Should Be Alive also highlights the important legislation that came from Nikki Kuhnhausen's murder and how it will protect future LGBTQ crime victims in Washington state. We want to let you know that Should Be Alive also just got a huge honor from Spotify this month, being named one of the top podcasts of the year, and is the only true crime show chosen to be on that list. We hope you download this compelling and emotional series and give it a listen. When we come back, it's time to help kids get the supplies they need for school. We're going to show you how. Our Hey Help campaign is the KGW school supply drive. We're trying to raise enough money and supplies for more than 15,000 kids. And one of the best and easiest ways that you can help is to give online. You can do it right now. Grab your phone, aim your camera at the QR code there on your screen, and then donate at our website. And if you don't have your phone right now, no problem. Just remember kgw.com/school. Well, that's the end of our show. Thanks for watching. Remember, the story, our story, well, that never ends.